Good afternoon and welcome to U.S. Citizen Diplomats to Iran. This is a ad hoc group that is now meeting today via the magic of Zoom conference. We have people in the Islamic Republic of Iran meeting with people in Washington, D.C., Wisconsin, New York City, and other places. I'm Sander Hicks. I'm the publisher of the New York Megaphone newspaper. And I'm really glad that you were able to join us here today or watch this. We have some very special guests here. We're meeting because we are a group of concerned US citizens and global citizens who are interested in the travesty of justice that's been issued by the US Treasury. On the February 13th, the US Treasury Department issued a sanction against New Horizon Conference. And I'm going to quote from the US Treasury document here. They make some pretty outrageous claims. They say New Horizon organization hosts international conferences that serve as a platform for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard to recruit and collect intelligence from attendees. Conference organizers have facilitated contact between the IRGC and US persons. Several New Horizon organization-sponsored conferences have been held in the past few years, where recruitment and collection efforts were made. These anti-Western conferences propagate anti-Semitism and conspiracy theories, including Holocaust denial. Now, these claims are unsubstantiated and they are false. They are part of an agenda that supports false flags and supports the run-up to war. We've seen people like Patrick Clausen. He is a director of research at the Washington Institute of Near East Policy, a Washington, D.C. think tank with close ties to AIPAC, who gave a statement at a public speech in D.C. in 2012, and he talked about creating a false flag attack, creating an excuse to attack Iran. He actually said that if in fact the Iranians are not going to compromise, it would be best if someone else started the war. So there's a lot to talk about here today. I want us to cover some of these outrageous claims. I want to rebut the claims in the interests of American freedom, jurisprudence, international understanding between countries, diplomacy. I want to remind everybody watching this that President Barack Obama tried to take the first steps towards reestablishing diplomatic ties with Iran. A lot of people here on this conference call, Mr. Mike Springmann, Mr. Kevin Barrett, myself, have been to conferences in Iran. We've learned about the country and the real truth about history between our countries. Researching the Iran-Contra scandal, it's interesting that Oliver North and Ronald Reagan were also trying to take the first steps towards reestablishing diplomatic ties to Iran, according to a recent podcast. So I think what we're doing here is the path of peace, the path of reason, the path of freedom, freedom from war and freedom from terror. So that's why I convened this conference today. And I've spoken enough, and now I would like to invite up our first esteemed speaker here. His name is Dr. Kevin Barrett. He has a PhD in Arabic and Islamic studies, and is fluent in Arabic. He's been a big part of bringing American intellectuals, including former State Department and former Defense Department officials, to Iran in the interest of diplomacy. Dr. Barrett, are you with us?
I am with you, Sander. It's great to be back with you.
Great. Thank you for being here at this conference.
So did you?
Yeah, you're on. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, it's kind of ironic that I had talked with Nader and other New Horizon organizers over the years about how it would be great if we brought more of these brilliant dissident ex-US government kind of people to Iran to facilitate exchanges between people who'd been on the inside in the US and people in Iran to get to know each other better. And we have some really amazing dissidents. Post 9/11, a lot of patriotic Americans who had served their government and taken an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, were outraged by this hijacking of American policy by neoconservatives and Zionists and other hardliners who essentially turned us into a gulag state at perpetual war with the enemies of Israel. So there's been a lot of pushback here in the U.S., and that's why there hasn't been a war on Iran yet. So I thought that some of those folks should talk with people in Iran and get a dialogue going. So this would be patriotic Americans talking with patriotic Iranians in the interest of mutual understanding. And what I heard from the New Horizon organizers was not, oh yeah, let's bring some former CIA people over so we can get their secrets. Are you kidding? This is like nothing remotely even like that entered anybody's mind. It was more like, yeah, we'd love to talk to these people. They sound interesting. But it's hard to get people like that over here because of the visa situation. The Iranian government is reluctant to issue visas to such people. So over the years, a lot of these people never made it. But then last year in Mashhad at the Al-Quds Eternal Capital of Palestine conference, finally we got a good contingent of these former USG types. And obviously they came not to be spilling secrets, but rather to be having dialogue about important issues. So I found it very strange that in the wake of that conference, suddenly there's this push against New Horizon. And I think that it's probably due to a combination of factors. First, the Trump administration is very rabidly Iranophobic. We've got Bolton and Pompeo who are on the payroll, basically, of one of the world's worst terror cults, the MEK, setting Iran policy. So that's part of it. Secondly, we had a bunch of great people like Mike Springmann and others who spearheaded a 9/11 Truth Initiative at the Mashhad conference. That was an attempt to convince the Iranian government to push back in U.S. federal court against the outrageous ruling that Iran had to pay 9/11 reparations. Had that succeeded and had Iran mounted a 9/11 truth defense in U.S. federal court on appeal, it would have been perhaps a destabilizing thing here in the U.S., at least from the neoconservative viewpoint. So they may have been unhappy about that effort. And I think also, I think the ideas that get exchanged at New Horizon conferences are ideas that energize and hearten people like us who want to make a better world, and terrified people like the neoconservatives who are happy fighting, scratching, and clawing for power in a Machiavellian way in a deeply corrupt world. We're exposing them at these conferences. And this kind of dialogue outside the parameters of the official discourse between people who are really too honest and too smart to fit in to the mainstream propaganda organs, this is a threat. If we had anybody who could create conferences like this here in the United States, they would see it as a threat too. So, right. And I think this is part of an effort to demonize real dissent by trying to cast it as the product of foreign propaganda. We've seen pushbacks against RT, Russia Today. We've seen pushback against Press TV, which has been banned by satellites. And these are outlets where American dissidents, patriotic Americans, and if you're a patriotic American in the post 9/11 era, you have to be a dissident. So they actually can get some exposure in places like that and in conferences like the New Horizon ones. So I'm not that surprised that there's been this kind of official attempt to demonize and persecute New Horizon because it's doing its job too well. But I am outraged, and I think we need to find a way to push back and to send them the message that we're not going to take it.
Great, Kevin. Excellent. And you've been my brother and a warrior for truth and peace, and a warrior really for spiritual consciousness. I commend you for your discipline and your love of God, and and that's led you to be a kind of a prophetic voice in America for 9/11 truth. And I'm really so happy that you took a risk and invited me to Iran to a conference 2 years ago, and then last year as well in Mashhad. And these things really helped me politically and helped my knowledge of the world, but also helped me spiritually visiting the mosque there. So thank you, Kevin, for that. And since you mentioned 9/11 truth, we're going to segue to Mr. Mike Springmann, formerly of the State Department Consular Office in Saudi Arabia, another warrior for truth in terms of the gigantic demonic 9/11 cover-up that we have been suffering under here in the USA. Mike Springmann is also the author of a new book called Visas for Al-Qaeda, which talks about his history of being forced to help bring rubber stamp or bring in certain Al-Qaeda linked terrorists that he thought or people that might be used as terrorists. He thought they had no qualifications to be brought in, and he was ordered by his superiors to just let this happen and stamp these visas. And so that's what his book is all about. But I think it'd be great if we get some commentary from Mike Springmann now to kind of give us the context of what's going on globally and in the USA, in New York City, in the Southern District, with the Lawyers Committee actions, the grand jury actions, 28 pages. Mike, give us some context.
Well, the basic context on this, I should say, first off, Salaam to everyone there who are listening to us. At the time I was in Jeddah in the late 1980s, I was in at the beginning of the creation of Islamic terrorism, where the Central Intelligence Agency and the State Department were recruiting the Mujahideen for the war in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union. These people then were used to destabilize governments the U.S. was opposing, such as in Yugoslavia, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and I would imagine they're going to take the 1,000 ISIS captives in Syria and probably send them to the western part of Iran, where they have a dissident Arab minority. The issue, of course, is that people have been trying to pry the lid off of this. My several times removed successor in Jeddah had issued visas to 11 of the 15 Saudis who got visas to come to the United States and fly airplanes into buildings. So the government is deeply involved in all of this. In what way, we don't yet know, because there's never been any kind of investigation. The Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Truth was working on a lengthy request for a grand jury petition to investigate this matter.
Yes, the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. Great group.
Yeah. And the last I heard of it was that apparently the Southern District of New York, the U.S. Attorney's Office, has accepted this, and I don't know where it stands now. Other groups, of course, have tried for more information and have struck out. But the whole thing is one great big ball of twine, or a raggedy sweater. If you manage to pull one link, you might pull another link, and soon the whole thing will unravel and display what was hidden beneath it. So that's our task, I guess, in one fashion or another, to push for a real investigation.
Great. And Mike, you've also been in touch with U.S. Treasury there in D.C. You've been trying to get to the bottom of the veracity of these outrageous claims.
Well, the best I could get was some guy named Patrick, who would not give his last name, saying that if the people in Iran and the organizations in Iran wanted to get off the sanctions list, there was an appeal process. And I had passed on to Nader and Zainab and a few other folks over there an email with contact information, both in physical address and also, which they preferred, the email address, seeking a petition to remove these sanctions because they were invalid. And as I've mentioned, I'm not advising as an attorney. I'm not advising anything other than simply to say I think this is the way to go. If the people in Iran want to dump this and get this thing straightened out, they should write a very direct and very concise and very to the point petition saying this is why this is wrong. There were no anti-Semites there. They had Arabs who were Semites. They had a rabbi from New York, David Weiss. He, of course, is a Jew and can be considered also a Semite. So that the whole thing is nonsense, and it was essentially an exercise in real people-to-people diplomacy, bringing folks from Europe, North Africa, and the United States and elsewhere together with a variety of backgrounds. Some were politicians, some were journalists, some were activists, some were thinkers of one kind or another. And it was an excellent exercise in Americans meeting Iranians and Iranians meeting Americans and Europeans meeting Iranians and vice versa. We were taken around the country, brought into meetings with more journalists from Iran, politicians from Iran, clerics from Iran, and had a free and full, frank discussion and full of ideas, and everybody went away immensely satisfied.
Great, Mike. Yes, I had an excellent experience at the conference too. And this might be a good time to segue to talk to our next speaker here. Thank you, Mike. We're going to talk to Haj Nader Talebzadeh next. I'm going to tell you a funny story first, though, about Vatican history. In 1452, the Pope issued something called the Doctrine of Discovery, which said that the Vatican gave blessing to anybody who wanted to slaughter any Saracens, any Muslims or pagans or indigenous natives in the New World, because they were all enemies of Christ. But if you see the film, The Messiah, by our next speaker, Haj Nader Talebzadeh, his film is called The Messiah. It's the history of Jesus from a Muslim Islamic perspective. You see how much Muslims love Christ and love Jesus, and how much they revere Jesus as one of the highest of all the prophets, which is a huge mind blower for anybody raised in America, you know, especially with this conditioning of Muslims as enemies of Jesus, when really they're the exact opposite. So I want to say thank you, Nader. Thank you for making the film The Messiah, and thank you for hosting the New Horizon Conference. And you told me some very informative things earlier, and I think it might come as a shock even to our other listeners here on the call today. You told me some very interesting things. I'd like you to repeat some of what you said about Monica Witt and your experiences. And so give us your, what will be your defense? Are you going to take Mike Springmann's advice and write a defense to the U.S. Treasury?
Yes, thank you so much. Let me begin thanking you, Sander Hicks, that you have done this. I mean, keeping the venue open. I never thought we'd do a New Horizon conference from New York. So,
yes, welcome to New York, Haj.
God works in very strange ways.
Yes.
Sometimes you want to limit something, the opposite happens. I always wanted to hear what our American brothers and sisters had to say about things. That's why we brought him over here. I also appreciate your mentioning the film on Jesus Christ. I think that's also a very important message. We do fervently believe in Jesus and his coming back. And I made a very long series on that. Recently, it was broadcast to a Spanish television station in Iran for the Latin American countries. And so, yes, that is important. We do have to build bridges. You know, we do what the neocons have done. They've confiscated truth speaking. They have hijacked truth speaking. So we're with you on this hijacking. I mean, if 9/11 was dissected carefully, how it happened, and what was the result of that happening, a lot of people will find out many other truths. But this is something that has remained camouflage for many of the people. And we had a lot of experts among our guests, among them Dr. Kevin Barrett with his books and his speeches, and other guests who have worked on the subject of exposing the hoax of 9/11 that ended with taking over Afghanistan and you know, littering it with all these bases, and the same thing then right after that with false pretexts to attack Iraq, kill so many innocent people. Not that Saddam Hussein was a hero, but that the fact that there was no weapon of mass destruction there. And so many pointed to that, including your other guest, Mr. Michael Malouf, and others who, Scott Ritter, who was also another guest coming up in the May conference we're going to have to talk about that, et cetera, et cetera. Anyhow, the New Horizon Conference, the main aim was to bring these luminaries to Iran from the West and from the East, and from Europe, from Russia, and also all the great exposers from the US. And I think the US heralds this movement in the world to wake people up. I think because the US has the major threat of the neocons, the deep state. So we share common beliefs, common threats, and I was very happy and very honored to have the collection of guests that we had. I only have to thank God for what happened, and also very proud that all the participants were patriots and they're all believers. This is one of the things I love about all the participants. They're believers. They believe in God. They believe in the day of judgment. Our actions will be counted momentarily as we live, and the day we die and the day we are risen. We have to answer these. And so I'm very glad that I'm talking to you right now from Tehran, midnight here. And God bless you. And I'm just listening to your other guests, and whatever else I can contribute, I'm at your service.
Great. Well, let me ask you a few questions, because you said some great things to me earlier too. I asked you, does New Horizon have guests that are Holocaust deniers?
No, we never had Holocaust deniers. We never focused on the subject. Everything that we did is recorded and shown. Everything is very, New Horizon is very transparent.
Yeah.
There's nothing clandestine about it. We're not anti-Semites. I grew up with Jewish classmates from kindergarten in Iran. Half of my class, by the time I got to 10th grade, were Jewish immigrants from Iraq who had come to an international school that I went to in Iran. So we grew up as friends. I've always had very good memories of them. And in every conference we had 2, 3, 4 Jewish participants, great thinkers. The last one that you were in, we had Rabbi Weiss in it. We had gentleman Miko Pellet, who was born in Israel, wrote the famous book Son of a General. And in every conference, we have a good collection of thinkers. In the previous conference, we had the great Dr. Norman Finkelstein, and he stayed here for a while. He went to different places, spoke in different places. So no, this is definitely untrue. It's a false charge. And we stick very hard against any of these slanders. That anti-Semitic and Holocaust, these are absurd, and they're very harsh, and we stand very hard against these statements.
Great. And I think what is being conflated here or confused on the U.S. Intelligence side is that the recent, well, not very recent, but there was a defector, Monica Witt, who converted to Islam and left. She was a former Air Force person, and I know she was in Iran in 2012. And she attended your conference, not New Horizon, but the Hollywoodism conference, which was the Iranian response to the movie Argo and other Hollywood stereotypes. And she was not a speaker, but she was kind of a spontaneous guest. Spoke about Occupy Wall Street, actually, for 5 minutes. But you're saying that she never actually attended a New Horizon conference.
Right. The time that she attended, there was the Hollywoodism conference. I was not at the helm of that. And she was a walk-in participant. She was already in Iran. Nobody invited her through the foreign ministry. We didn't ask for a visa. She was already in Iran. She had come in from before, and whoever had brought her in had brought her in. And at the Hollywoodism conference, she was a walk-in participant. Some people, some friends invited her, I think, at that time, and she had come from the States. And our conferences are very interesting. And they asked her if she wants to say something, and evidently she said, "I would like to talk about the 99% movement." And she did, but she was not a formal guest. Our guests are people who are known intellectuals with articles and books and speeches who are very, very unambiguous. They're very, very transparent. They're famous. They talk. They make speeches around the world. And she doesn't fit any of these. And when she came, she didn't make an impression, because I have a weekly live show since that time. I never invited her because she was a little bit ambiguous.
Yeah.
If anybody like her comes up, she has to make a statement, she has to make a speech. She did none of those.
Yeah.
And so we had nothing to do with her, but using that as a pretext to terrorize the whole conference.
Thank you. And on the U.S. side, I think a lot of us that are, interested in supporting New Horizon might have assumed that the recent incarceration of Press TV journalist Marzia Hashemi had to do with the Monica Witt defection. And maybe that's why she was detained for 10 days and interrogated without any charges or anything. Mike, I'm going to put you on mute there for a second.
Sure.
Okay, great. Oops. Okay. Sorry, I put myself on mute. Okay. Bear with me, everybody. Bear with me. Okay, here we go. Okay, good. Sorry. Okay. So my point is that I personally, and I think others on the here on the conference call, thought that the incarceration of Marzia Hashemi, which was pretty alarming, it was a violation of habeas corpus. This was an American-born Iranian journalist who was incarcerated without charges for 10 days. We thought she was being interrogated, having to do perhaps with some sort of intelligence matter, Monica Witt and her defection perhaps. It turns out, Nader, what you told me earlier today was no, that you have some information that she was actually interrogated about the New Horizon Conference, and that 90% of what she was asked about was the New Horizon Conference. That means to me that this whole sanction seems to be an act of censorship without cause, without any kind of justification, right?
Right. Not only she was asked these questions, we had two other guests who were intimidated by the FBI, one in great length, and they came to his door early in the morning, another by telephone, and they refused. So the FBI was onto something, and they were planning on something, and at the root of it was a list of new guests that were going to come this May. And it included, I think, at least 10 more former government officials. And they don't like that at all. So all of these people were asked about this new list. The emails had been hacked. They were shown. Do you know this? Are you aware of that? And but these things sort of ascended to the point that after Ms. Hashemi's release, just maybe a couple of weeks later, we had suddenly the sanctions slapped on New Horizon, and also based on executive order, which is also very unusual.
Aha, right. And I tell everybody on the call that I think it's very exciting that you are planning, if you can get this sanction lifted, you are planning to have former Governor Jesse Ventura and UN Arms Inspector Scott Ritter. So this is actually a great, I think, elevation in the New Horizon game. You guys have really taken your game up to a new level, right?
Yes. You know, Scott Ritter is an important man. They framed him for many different things. He was an important man because he exposed a lot of hypocrisy.
Yeah.
And I know he's a brave military man. I've seen him speak in New York, and we had invited him before, but we were not successful to have him come. This time he said yes, because after our last conference where Mr. Philip Giraldi and the other officers came over, I think it became salient and obvious that yes, it's a good place to come, a good place to support, because Iran is at the hub of all the stigmatization and demonization. So it was. I know that like people like Ritter Scott is a brave man, and I was very happy that he'd be coming in. Also, the American political and sport hero Jesse Ventura, and a number of others. We were very happy to have them come, and we were very honored that we're going to have. I think the new list was also a serious threat, and this is something very important to mention. The new list. I mean, the new list was shown to people. The FBI would show the people and say, "Are you aware?" Yes, you're invited. Are you going to go? Yes, I'm going to go. If I'm invited, yes, I've said yes, and I will go. I think all this firm stance of the guests also intimidates the system that has for 4 decades demonized Iran. Remember, we were attacked by Saddam Hussein, who was supported full-fledged by the U.S. and Europe.
Right. Would it be possible to hold New Horizon in Paris?
Yes. I mean, the model of New Horizon can be held anywhere to answer back the neocon hopes. It can be done anywhere. But I don't know why it isn't. Why it isn't done in Paris. Why it isn't done in other capitals. It's because the neocons have their tentacles everywhere. Very few places that are free enough to hold a conference like this. To be quite frank with you, why don't we have this in Egypt or in Turkey or in Pakistan? None of these places have an incentive to have a conference like that, except our own country.
Great. Well, I'm glad you have had this conference, and I think we can. A call like this is really good because it helps Americans to see a real life Iranian or two and how intelligent and compassionate they are. Speaking of Iranians, I also you're not the only Iranian on the call. We also have your wife, Zainab Mehana. Am I pronouncing that correctly this time? Good enough? Okay, great. Let me see. Are you muted still? I thought I took you on mute. Oh, can you turn your audio, turn your microphone on? Yeah. Great. Oh, good. I think yes. And you've also helped Nader be a host of the conference. And tell us your thoughts on the sanctions from the U.S. Treasury.
I would like to remind the listeners or the viewers that we are going to be refuting the allegations that were imposed on us first to the Iranian intelligence. Number two, we're not related to IRGC. Number three, we're not anti-American. We've just offered a forum of free speech. It's the people's right to address the injustice as it impacts on them on everyday's life. We have not collected any information from the guests pertaining to any secrets or from any former U.S. intelligence. We are not related to the internet company called Net Payguard Savam that they have mentioned on the
yeah, the same sanction, right? Yeah, it was confusing. Yeah.
Contact with any of the four men that work in this company. We're not related, and we have not been in contact with Monica Witt. We're not anti-Semitic. I myself am Lebanese. We're not Holocaust deniers, and as Nader has mentioned earlier, pertaining to Norman Finkelstein, who stayed here for 15 days, and his parents, especially his mother, was a survivor of the Holocaust, or a Holocaust survivor. Strangely enough, after the press release was released, after it was issued on the 13th of February by the Treasury Department, the European Treasury released this press on the 14th of February. And then another entity that I cannot identify its origin, it might be related to MEK, it's called IFAMT, again, reiterated the same press release, and then they added that Nader and I and two other members are involved with weapons of mass destruction and violators of human rights, and they've labeled us as high alert, and the code color is red, and basically we are terrorists.
Great. Well, I'd like to point out that the group that has come up a couple of times is worth mentioning, and anybody watching this needs to research the MEK. They are a group seeking to overthrow the Islamic Republic of Iran. They're pretty nutty. They were a very small group. They were in Albania at one point. The CIA tried to work with them, and then the CIA couldn't work with them because they were too crazy, and they were on the terrorism watch list, and they were like, shunned to Albania. But recently, under Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, they were taken off the terrorism watch list. And you have to really wonder who Hillary Clinton was working for. There was a front page story in the Washington Post about how money talks and how much big money lobbying had gone into taking the MEK off the terrorism watch list. So this is the same group now that Rudy Giuliani, 9/11 criminal, and John Bolton, national security advisor under the President Trump. These are people that have taken money from the MEK for these big speaking gigs, like a $50,000 speaker's fee. The MEK is no longer a tiny little group in Albania. They're no longer a weird Marxist cult seeking to overthrow the Islamic Republic of Iran. They are now this big group that has lots of money. So it seems that they're being groomed to be a possible alternative if the neocons needed to say, this is the savior who can overthrow the extremist government of Iran. But the government of Iran is not extremist. The government of Iran is democratically elected. It's a theocratic democracy. And that's another thing that Americans need to know. So thank you, Zainab. Thank you for your comments. Good.
The executive order that was issued 13224, and that is related to the 9/11 thing. It was actually issued 23 days after 9/11 under Bush era. So I don't know what it might mean, but it does have a lot of impact. 9/11 on a lot of things that are taking place around the world.
Yes, I know the executive order you're talking about. Hamid Gashgavi also pointed it out to me, and he said, we're under this executive order. So you're talking about an executive order that has to do with terrorists and terrorism assets. And there's been a lot of cheap talk about 9/11. It's so emotional. People they aren't willing to really look at it. They aren't really willing to look at the fact that the USA and Saudi Arabia and its ally Israel were the ones that were really behind the 9/11 attacks. It had nothing to do with the so-called Al-Qaeda movement or Iran. And you know, we need to be people of truth and people of peace and people of science. You know, the science is on our side, and that's why the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry has made such great victories and great strides. You know, we have the truth on our side. So yes, I thank you for that. I do know the executive order you're talking about. If there's anybody else that would like to make any final comments, I think we can probably wrap up this meeting. Well, we could also do this. We could go around the room again and talk about action points going forward. It seems like we should maybe work on a statement. Maybe it could be a joint statement, an international statement. I would suggest or make a motion that that we write a first draft. We could collaborate using some sort of, you know, Google Drive or some sort of cloud-based software. And we can, I know New Horizon itself will be issuing a statement in its own defense, but there could be a kind of a corollary statement. Does anybody second the motion?
Well, let me make a remark here, if I might, Sander.
Yeah, thanks, Mike.
I see this as a two-pronged attack on the Treasury Department. We've got the people in Iran doing their rebuttal to this ridiculous charge of working with the Revolutionary Guards Corps and recruiting intelligence operatives and things like this. Nobody ever said, hey, Mike, you want to spy for us? But I think we've got to find people in the United States from the other end to pressure the Treasury Department and to expose this. And with all the people who hate Donald Trump, well, here's something they can use to beat him with. And I've been trying for the last few days to do something about this, contacting the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, who have a national security section, and was told off today by this fellow Michael Price, who had been working with the national security end of things at the association. He didn't want to have anything to do with this. He wasted enough time with me already, and he wouldn't give me the name of the man at the American Civil Liberties Union he had been talking with. He was running scared and obviously had been told, don't talk about this. So we need to find some people and organizations who are going to fight and push and get out in public. But as we've noted with Ilhan Omar, the congressman from Minnesota, when she questioned AIPAC and Israeli money going to Congress, she was shut down by the leaders of Congress themselves. So I don't know how many politicians we can get on our side, and I don't know how many organizations we can get on our side, but I think we sure got to try very hard to do this.
Yeah, I recognize Representative Ilhan Omar was chastised just for a tweet because she was asked about why do most Republicans support AIPAC, and at first I shared your horror that she was made to recant or apologize just because she said AIPAC, but really she said, I think, the Benjamins. So she was maybe I don't know, maybe there's some nuance there that she was being criticized for. Trying to claim that the Republican support of Israel is all about money, because I could see how that could be seen as inaccurate. So maybe the lesson is just to be really specific, that it's not just financial interests, but there really is a kind of a misguided Christian Zionism that I think puts a lot of U.S. Right-wing power on the side of Israel and Zionism, and therefore demonizes any country that doesn't go along with the war on terror or the expansion of the settlements, etc.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Washington Report on the Middle East publishes at least one report every year on how much AIPAC and other money goes to every individual congressman by the current year and by their lifetime in Congress. So you can see where the dollars add up, where the Benjamins go.
Right.
So we've got to counter this. We've got to find some organization that will get out and has enough clout to get on the national news media and say, look at what Treasury did to these people, and it was wrong. All they were doing was advancing American interests, trying to avoid war, to avert any kind of future conflict, and to bring people-to-people diplomacy out into the open.
Right. Good. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop recording at this point, and then maybe we can continue the meeting. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Okay.